All right. Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I think it's Wednesday. If I'm incorrect, somebody will let me know. Welcome to the first workshop today focused on supporting business and workforce. On Monday, we had 3 workshops focused on critical infrastructure. And tomorrow there will be 3 workshops focused on community resilience, and then Friday 3 workshops focused solely on housing. So we'll get through the details of what these are. My name is John Romine. I'm part of the support team. I work here at Collaboratory, and we're going to sort of facilitate this conversation today. Tessa is. And we have about 90 minutes. Before we do some introductions of our panelists, I want to just go over a couple little housekeeping items. This is being recorded and streamed live. So branch members and panelists, you have microphones in front of you. Please push the button so the light turns green when you are speaking, and have it close to you so folks on Zoom can hear. The second thing, we have branch members who are also attending virtually. So as we go through the process, please go ahead and drop questions in the chat. We will be monitoring the chat, and then make sure those questions from branch members on Zoom get surfaced to the panelists in the branch. Branch members that are in the room, this is not you just sit here and listen. You're able and hopefully want to interact throughout the conversation with the panelists to really dive deep in what we're trying to accomplish. So we'll go through what the purpose of the workshops are here in a minute. But first, let's do some introductions. So we'll start at the FGCU end. Quick name, organization, and then we'll get started.
All right. Hello, my name is John Shannon. I work at the Regional Economic Research Institute at Florida Gulf Coast University, and I've been there since 2015.
Great. Hi, I am Glenn Whitehouse. I am the Director of Core Skills at Florida Gulf Coast University, which is a title I've held for exactly 4 days. So I work with the Skill Badging Initiative at the university.
Good morning. I'm Sharon Woodbury. I work for the City of Cape Coral's Economic and Business Development Office. I've been with the office 1 year. It's my anniversary, I think 2 weeks ago. And I have 25 years of experience in economic development, and looking forward to the discussion.
Good morning, everyone. Dr. Cilento Anderson. I'm the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer for Lee Health, the system's first role. I've been in this role for about 8 months. I started September 19th, and so I got a really interesting welcome to Southwest Florida the following week, but very happy to be a part of the panel this morning.
Great, thank you. And so this first workshop around supporting business and workforce is really focused on the diverse workforce. And so we will go through a series of questions and conversations really to get to some solutions around, hey, Robbie, thank you, around how we get some for this resiliency plan that we're working towards. So just real quick, high level overview of the Recovery Task Force. So the Recovery Task Force is based on the FEMA framework for disaster response and recovery. It was voted on by the Board of County Commissioners. Commissioner Kevin Ruane is the chair of the task force. It is made up of 13 members that represent the elected entities in Lee County as a whole. So the cities, the health system, the fire districts, the school board, law enforcement, et cetera. And so this is really a cross-jurisdictional effort to make a more resilient Lee County. There are 8 branches that make up the Recovery Task Force. So you have planning and capacity that's looking at the higher level of our community as a whole. What are those policy changes that we could make across the entire community? Economic recovery. This branch or this workshop or this series of workshops is really going to drill deep into that. So how does our economy recover post-disaster? Education workforce also, we had an education workforce challenge before the storm. The storm did not help it in any way. Health and social services, both the healthcare system, but also the social services side of our community. How do we make a more resilient community? Infrastructure, roads, transportation, underground utilities, communication, power, all of those sorts of things. Housing, Again, another example of a challenge we had before, only exacerbated by the storm. Natural resources, and then cultural resources. So we are on a really aggressive timeline driving towards December 5th of this year, where the Board of County Commissioners will vote on the resiliency and recovery plan. And so we just exited the initial community engagement effort, where we really were gathering information both from the branches of what the priorities are, but from the community, like what are the priorities for the community for us to build a more resilient Lee County. The area or the steps we're in now is really focused on building solutions. So what are those solutions or initiatives that we can draft that would go into the plan that the community, partners across the community could then ultimately implement, and then what are the funding mechanisms that it would take to make those happen. So we are in the building the solutions phase right now. And so today's conversation really is solutions focused. Less about revisiting the storm, but more about how do we think about what are those detailed actions and what are those steps that it may take to build solutions for a more diverse workforce in our community. So as it relates to community engagement, we did a robust community-wide community engagement effort. We had hosted 15 in-person town halls all across the entire county. Offered 2 virtual town halls as well. The town halls, some were in English and Spanish, so we're making sure we could reach our entire community. Numerous mentions in the media, and we had a little over 1,000 folks participate in those public town halls. There's also a survey on resiliently.com that is still live and active. We were over 4,900 at the beginning of the week, where folks have weighed in and provided input on what those priorities are for our community post. Or again, galaxy far away. Post Hurricane Ian. And then on March 30th, we hosted across the entire 5-county region a day-long effort where people got together. It was called On the Table, shared a meal, shared coffee, whatever it may be, to focus on what are the priorities that our community has going forward. And so today's workshop, so as I shared earlier, they're all this week. And so this is really to dive into, so the branches have identified some priority areas, some initial solutions to solve for the challenges that exist in our community. Some related to the storm, but some existed before the storm. And so today is all about supporting business and workforce. As I shared on Monday, we talked about critical infrastructure. And then tomorrow is community resilience, and Friday is all about housing. So again, the goal of the workshops is to provide additional information from subject matter experts, which are the panelists, to the branch members and to the support team as we start to develop out what these initiatives are for solutions to make Lee County more resilient. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tessa.
Thanks, John. All right, good morning, everybody. Are you excited? We're going to talk about business and workforce development, my favorite topic. My name is Tessa Lesage. I work here at Collaboratory. I'm a future maker. And Future Makers is our regional coalition that has been working for about 9 years to transform the workforce. So we're really, really excited to have this discussion and this great panel with us here today. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and dive in with questions. We're going to be thinking about innovative solutions and things that we should be thinking about, or things that we should expand on that can really help us support our businesses and workforce development here in the region. Branch members, if you have questions, you can just raise your hand. Don't forget to cue your mic, and we will go ahead and get started. All right, so first off, I think one of the biggest things to recognize, and John mentioned it, is that we had a workforce problem before Hurricane Ian. I was wondering if you all could give us some ideas and thoughts on what are some of the key factors to continuing the economic growth and workforce development that we were working on, post disaster. And I'll let you all decide who wants to start. Okay.
So I think post-disaster, the needs of the community of Southwest Florida, I don't think they really changed much prior to the disaster, because for the most part, it's really 2 things. And I think they were really exacerbated by the hurricane. The first is the diversification of the economy, right? We're a very hospitality focused economy down here and as we should be, right? That's our comparative advantage. And we saw with the hurricane that, you know, the hurricane came in, it's really ravaged the area, and that's really where the focus is going to be with that sector, especially considering the location of those establishments. But the second one, and this might really be a preview for Friday, but I think they're still related, is the affordable housing, right? It's one thing to have people stay here after they graduate, but they need to be able to afford to be able to stay here. And so I do think those two things are connected in one way or another. And
Yep.
so if you want to achieve economic growth, if you want to achieve full employment, and we are near full employment right now. I think the unemployment rate is less than 3% right now in the area.
Yeah.
If you want to maintain it, I mean, we have to address those two issues.
Yep. So, boy, that just makes me want to ask about a million more questions, but I'm gonna let everyone answer the question if anyone who wants to answer. But so basically you're saying the two things that you think we should focus on are diversifying the sectors that we're growing in the economy and a focus on attainable housing.
Yeah, because like when we have our graduates graduate from FGC, from FSW, from Hodge, and so forth, we want them to be able to stay in the area, right? And
Right.
it's one thing if they're majoring in RHM, for example, you know, that they're gonna have a lot of opportunities down here. But if
What
you're
is that?
going, resort hospitality and management.
Yeah.
But if you're going into something, financial insurance or any of the professional and technical services, where we might not have as many of those jobs available, they might not be as likely to stay here. They're likely try to go elsewhere to find occupations.
So those hard to fill jobs where we may not have as large of a number, that's where housing really starts to come into even more of a play, because if they're unable to find housing, then it's easy to go find a job maybe somewhere else.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you also have the aspect of remote work too, which is also going to start bringing people down here, but might not necessarily be working down here, right?
Yeah.
They might be working for companies outside there, which can be a benefit and a curse depending on.
Okay, fantastic. Anyone want to add anything to some of the key factors that we should be focusing on to continue economic growth?
Yeah, I'd add a couple things to that. I think post-disaster and even really post-pandemic, you know, we're 2.5, 3 years out
Mhm.
from that. I think now more so than ever, it's really important that as a community that we invest in the right kind of capital, the right kind of infrastructure that really impacts the community from a longevity aspect. And so I think that's extremely crucial and very important. I'd also add to that as well, even more so now than ever, because of the workforce shortages and things of that nature, it's even more so extremely important to be innovative when it comes to your solutions for your workforce, and even from a community resiliency aspect as well. I think we all realize and know that it's very tough for one organization to sort of take the onus and responsibility. You know, from a community aspect, and even really when it's looking at workforces as well, you know, those employees, they work for the employer, but at the same time, there's other pockets that those employees could potentially tap into. So for us, within the healthcare realm, you know, we really affect about 20% of that person's overall health. 80% is everything else, where they live, where they work, where they stay, the housing and things of that nature that they're afforded to have. And so for us, community collaborations is very key and very crucial in keeping those individuals healthy from a health aspect, from a wellness aspect as well, so that they can be gainfully employed and really add to our community's infrastructure and resiliency from an economic perspective.
So Dr. Anderson, is there something that you think that we should be focused on then? I mean, I think it's such a great point. Quality of life and what it's like to not be at work is part of supporting businesses, right? And workforce development. So can you give some examples of things that you think we should be thinking about?
Absolutely. I think, you know, when you think about quality of life and you think about your workforce, typically, historically, lots of times, when you're engaging your workforce, we've really done that, you know, in an annual type survey or annual type engagement survey. And now what you've really seen is that organizations do what they call pulse surveys, to where whether it's quarterly, whether it's biannually, they're really checking in on those employees to see, hey, what do you feel? What are things that you are challenged with? And in all times, you can't necessarily fix those things, but at least that's why you really want to focus on the innovation and the community collaborations so you can meet the needs of those employees. And so I would say those pulse surveys are really important. And then just also, you know, listening to your staff and listening to your workforce to see what's very important to them. You know, as we talk about diverse workforce, you know, things kind of change, and that's not necessarily good or bad, but lots of individuals are coming to workforces now, not necessarily for the pay, not necessarily for the benefits, but what does your organization stand for? How can I be a part of that mission? And so I think that adds to it as well.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I have a question. I'm sorry, Dr. Anderson. You said that 20% of a person's health is affected directly by I took medical care.
Mhm.
What is the other? You said housing has an effect.
Absolutely. And so typically what we refer to those as the social drivers of health. And so typically where I live, where I'm employed, is my community in what we call a food desert? Do I have ample transportation to get to and from you know, where I need to go to be able to receive healthcare or receive education or things of that nature? And so even in the healthcare realm, CMS has really started a keen focus for healthcare systems and organizations like alike to really focus on those things for our patients as they come in. So when our patients come to us, lots of times it's because of those things that I just mentioned in utilities, interpersonal safety, mental health, and things of that nature. So you'll probably start to hear more so of that, but it's really all of the things that are outside of that person's actual health.
Fantastic. All right, Sharon.
So if I can just add to that a bit, I think, you know, what we really are focusing on here is full employment, right? So how do we increase the number of people who are actively involved in our workforce? And I think that involves a change in mindset in terms of how we, how our employers look at our workforce and our personnel. Some of that is, again, the whole person in some of the social services needs that they have. So there's the health, the mental health aspect of that. There's the financial challenges of housing, childcare. All of those things are critical in a person being able to fully show up at work. But also beyond that, I think what we have to keep in mind is with the change in mindset, what are we looking at for our employees in terms of skill sets and minimum requirements? Employers will, I think there will be a benefit and an advantage to rethinking of what our qualifications are for new employees, not being set on a certain number of years of experience. Looking at the skills that you want to capture from your employees rather than having some idea of what that looks like. So it really is a matter of, you know, how do you embrace the entire population? How do you look at those who have been overlooked, who may be, you know, can be a significant contribution to the workforce?
Okay, so that is really helpful because it's the perfect entrance for Dr. Whitehouse. I want to just mention that this is such a great point because almost 60% of our workforce here in the region, people aged 25 to 64, don't have a credential beyond high school. They may need to get their GED or learn English in order to enter into the workforce, but that's really the untapped workforce. So this is such a great point about how do we think, do you really need a bachelor's degree to do this job? What do you actually need and how can we start to assess whether a person has those skills or quickly upskill them to be able to get those skills and become employed? Dr. Whitehouse?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that FGCU and many other educational institutions now are getting into and becoming much more aware of is the need for educational experiences that are smaller than a degree, right? And so that's what we mean when we talk about micro-credentials and digital badges and things of that nature. I think they kind of have two roles. One is for the person who doesn't have a college degree, and one is for the person who does. And I think those are a little bit separable. But I think, as you mentioned, you know, there's a lot of training. There's a lot of training of people for specific job roles that doesn't require somebody to get a 4-year degree. And I think, you know, college has been the mantra of economic advancement for so many years. And this is what we hear about. You know, my son went to middle school, and all the teachers were required to have the banner of wherever they went to college, like on their door. I mean, that was like the thing, right? So that's all worthy. I'm certainly not going to diss college. I work there. But I, you know, I think to make sure that those kinds of training opportunities are there for everybody is really important. The other thing I would say is this: for people who do have a college degree, I think it's somewhat of a different game, which is that, you know, all college degrees are general and all jobs are specific, right? So sometimes we go through discussions in universities feeling like, oh, we have to have a major for every job that's out there.
Yep.
That's actually really neither necessary nor beneficial to either the student or to the employer. What you want is people who are flexible and who can do a lot of different jobs, you know, 20 different jobs with a particular degree. But what is really helpful about some of these micro-credentialing experiences, it provides those bridges that person needs to go from that general degree into a specific job. I think the value of a college degree a lot of times is that it gives you the core skills that allow you for flexibility to pivot from that job if something happens economically, or you decide you don't like it, or another opportunity comes up, or whatever it is. To have that kind of educational infrastructure of both degrees and credentials gives people the kind of flexibility to pivot, to switch careers, to take on different kinds of challenges, and it helps sort of I think support a flexible workforce in this area that isn't going to be immediately destroyed if a certain industry leaves the area or something like that.
Yes. Okay. So you are talking about this idea of the ability to create opportunities for lifelong learning. You know, whether you need a certain skill to enter into a career pathway and you don't have a degree, or you're already in a career, you want to change careers, or you want to move up. And so I like this idea because what it's leaning towards is this idea of creating a talent pipeline, because we always need entry level positions to reopen. That means people have to be able to move up. And then you have a good pipeline of training programs that are feeding people into the system to create that pipeline. And so, you know, from that standpoint, I'm curious, and I think we sort of started to talk about this, but when we're thinking about workers from entry level to highly experienced, what are some of the barriers that our workforce is facing right now? And what do you think some of the solutions are to overcome them? Have you seen things in other places, or have you been driving around on your own as a person who works here thinking, boy, if we could just do this, that could really help overcome some of these barriers, regardless of where a person falls in that talent pipeline?
So there was a program that was kind of just getting its legs that I'm familiar with from Ohio, where I was working. And it really was looking at how the success of an employee is not in a vacuum, is bringing in a number of different agencies. It's social services, it's workforce development and training, and having all of those supportive services involved in a path for employees or potential employees to upskill themselves, but also address some of the challenges that they have. So transportation, for example, the program was structured where they would engage with employers who were committed to the overall success of potential employees. So they provided job opportunities for different people in workforce and residents who wanted to have a job, but they had challenges along the way. So they were, in this case, specifically trained in skills that would support the employer who was partnering with them. Some of the funding agencies that had training dollars, helped provide wages for those residents as they were going through the program. But we also had the transportation, our public transportation system offering transportation back and forth to their training, but also it extended to when they needed that support and training for the job themselves and being able to get back and forth to work. It was vouchers for transportation, vouchers for food, vouchers for childcare. So it was all of those social services and the training mixed in one. It wasn't just everything separate. It was bringing all of those resources together, but having the employer there on the back end to offer the job once they went through that
So-
skill development.
So this idea of if we can support a person to engage in this process of overcoming the barriers, getting the training that is needed, that the employers are engaged in a point where they're ready to say, if you go through all these things and you get this skill, you can, you get this credential, we will offer you a job. And that's really a different way of thinking, right? We don't do that a lot. We don't bet on a person all the time before they actually have the skills that we're asking them to have. Though we do have some really great experimental examples that we've done here in Southwest Florida that I think we can build on. Harrison?
So we have several branch members online joining us today, and one has posted a question in the chat. I'll read this from Diana Geraldo.
Okay.
From a human resources perspective, job descriptions often list degrees as a requirement. Is there a different approach screening tool to evaluate their value, experience, ability to be able to apply and attain the job?
Excellent question. Dr. Whitehouse, do you have a response to that?
Sure. So I think that, yeah, it's definitely true that I think traditionally a lot of job postings list a degree. I think the degree posting is there as really a proxy for things that people expect to go along with the degree. So people expect somebody with a bachelor's degree to be a good communicator, to be able to write pretty well, to be a good critical thinker, to have some experience working in teams, regardless of what their specific major is, right? So I think we've had this degree system that is supposed to have the signaling function to employers of what you can expect from somebody who has that degree. I think for a variety of reasons, I think that signaling function has kind of broken down. So I think that one of the things I think colleges are becoming increasingly conscious of, and FGCU I think is actually kind of a leader in this, is thinking about ways that we can explicitly signal to employers those skills that are usually invisible in the degree. I think there's a whole set of expectations, especially around what people would call core skills or transferable skills. I don't really like the term soft skills, but people use that as well. Expectations about what a person can do that are implicit or invisible. But I think one of the things, for instance, that we try to do with badging is to make some of those things explicit, so that instead of sort of just expecting that person can have good writing skills or good teamwork skills, let's have some structures that make visible to the employer specific things that student has done that show their teamwork skills, so that when you come in and say, oh, tell us about a time you used teamwork to solve a problem, you don't just say, well, I have this degree, right? You can actually give some specific examples that tell a story about your experience working with teams.
So can you give me an example of something that we should be thinking about developing so that employers feel more confident hiring folks that maybe don't have the traditional credentials that we usually expect of them?
Well, sure. Okay. I mean, I think that, and I'll talk here about college graduates, I guess. So one of the things I think that is, I think true about the connection or that bridge between a college degree and a career is that sometimes people need a fairly high degree of specialization out of a college graduate, right? An example of this would be a nurse or an engineer, right? Where somebody really needs somebody to have the technical training that has those very specific components. You trust me, you don't want anybody building your bridge except a civil engineer, right? Those kinds of things have a very specific, those kinds of degrees have a very specific signaling component. But I think it's also true that many of the most common jobs for people with a college degree are jobs that to a very large degree are combinations of core skills or common skills with transferable skills, much more than they are applications of specific technical skills. And so I think that's really important, I think, for employers to keep in mind. It's also important for job seekers to keep in mind, frankly, because I'll just use my own family as an example. And my wife is a successful business owner. Some of you know her. She never took a business class. She majored in sociology, right? Does that mean her degree was useless? No, it doesn't. She learned about all kinds of, she learned about families, which is who she markets to. She learned all kinds of public speaking skills and critical thinking skills. I think it's really important for people to understand the role that skills have in making people ready for some of those most common jobs. I always tell students, I talk to arts and sciences students largely, right? I always tell them every English major is one Excel course from being a manager, if that's what you want to do. It's not false. And I think one of the things that's important, though, is that I think we think a lot about content and not as much as we should about skills. I think this is largely true in education. We think a lot about content, which is what the name of a major signals. We don't think enough about skills, which are the components that are actually going to allow somebody to do a job. So I think we do need to do a better job making those things that are invisible on a transcript. And typically the name of any course on your transcript is the content of that course. It's not the skill. So I think we need to do a much better job and can do a much better job making sure transcripts, degrees, and all those things actually signal what the students can do as opposed to just what they studied.
Okay, so taking something like a history degree and saying this person also has these skills that we hear employers need, which is critical thinking, the ability to communicate and write. Like, how do you translate these content topics into actual skills? Dr. Anderson, do you have any examples of how we can visualize skills that are maybe not in a degree?
No. So one of the things that we really try to implement and really focus on as we're looking at, can the employee do their job? We've all probably been in interviews before, and the person didn't necessarily have this qualification or that qualification, but we felt that the individual can do the job. And oftentimes it may have been that where we didn't hire that person because they didn't meet those minimum qualifications. So one of the things that we really try to focus on is, as we look at our job descriptions and as we kind of survey the positions that we have, we really look to see, again, okay, what does this position really require? A bachelor's degree or this certification or that certification? And then more so than that, how do we tap into our own workforce? When you talk about sustainability, you talk about resiliency. How do we tap into our own workforce to create pathways for them as well? And I think that's one of the missed opportunities that a lot of employers have, is that workforce that's currently right there today. And there are several experts within that workforce. And so giving individuals the opportunity not only to achieve credentials and things of that nature, but also to teach other individuals within that specific field or that specific role as well. I would also encourage us as well, as we're talking about job descriptions and, does the employee have the skill? I would also encourage us to, look at our policies as well. Many of our policies may have been created and great at the time, but those policies may have been 15, 20, 30 years ago. Does that still make sense for these employees, this group of what we're focused on today? Many times our missions change, our vision change, our values change. So annually reviewing both those job descriptions and some that may be low-hanging fruit, and then also our policies, when most policies have a revision date. And so one of the things we try to do at Lee is that as we review those things, we really look to see, does it make sense? And lastly, I would encourage, as we look to hire new employees, I would encourage individuals to look at our interviewing processes and things of that nature. So are there opportunities on that interview team so that individuals are aware of focusing on the skill and focusing on the inclusivity and things within the workforce?
I'm going to ask you for an example of a policy that might need to be revised.
So for example, there's been a lot of different policies around disabilities and how do we create inclusive environments for team members who may have physical disabilities or team members who may have non-physical disabilities. And so oftentimes, you know, if something was created, you know, 15, 20 years ago, it was a real keen focus on a physical disability.
Mm.
Well, now if you look at a lot of things in 2023, there are a lot of mental disabilities where if you were to look at an employee or look at an individual, you won't necessarily know that that employee has a disability, but things such as that nature, looking at things as far as accessibility for when patients may come into our workforce or when patients may come into any of our facilities, you know, are we equipped in the way in which we need to be? So that's an example of a policy that needs to be constantly reviewed because the dynamics are constantly changing.
Really great example. Dr. Manaya.
Just add that, you know, the way from a job description perspective, there's HR professionals you commonly use in one of the Bibles called Lominger, right? And Lominger is this big, thick book that says, okay, what do you mean by collaboration? And there's about 7 or 8 definitions that are very, very specific. And they say, okay, well, this is what we mean by collaboration in our company, right? That leads to a better understanding of what we're looking for in that employee. Now, with technology, there are platforms that are designed that are very easy to work with that define that competency and provide a brief simulation. Okay, here's an example of a challenge you might face, and that potential employee works through that, and it will confirm if that competency was achieved or not. And many of the larger companies around the world are leveraging those kind of tools to do initial vetting of, let's say, 3,000 candidates and get it down to 100 and get it further. And I know Massive U has one of those types of platforms, but that technology is available so that you don't necessarily only have to rely on, do they have that credential or do they have that degree, but do they have that competency that we're looking for? And yeah, so that's a tool.
Great, thank you. Dr.
Yeah,
Whitehouse.
so in the assessment world and at universities, we call that authentic assessment, right? Which is the idea is that instead of giving somebody like a standard, you know, like standardized test like the SAT is supposed to test language skills and critical thinking and quantitative reasoning in a kind of an abstract way and a decontextualized way. But what authentic assessment tries to do is to test those very same skills in the actual context in which they would be utilized in professional life. So there's a really interesting test, for instance, called the Collegiate Learning Assessment, which is a kind of an alternative to some of those standardized tests, which instead of asking people a bunch of multiple choice questions that test those critical thinking and language skills, uses an actual professional scenario where the students get a sort of a rich description. They get a role, they get a rich description of a scenario, they need to analyze a document library, and they come up with an open-ended solution to it. And then you can use that same kind of assessment to, again, you're still teaching critical thinking, communication, and quantitative skills, but you're doing it in a way that actually allows you to assess, can this person apply it in a professional setting? So I think that's something that's kind of really interesting and up and coming in the assessment world in college, whether it's done in a simulation or on paper.
I have a question. We have a very non-diverse workforce at my office. They pretty much all look like me. They all have the same backgrounds as me. They all have the same general education as me. And it's scary for me to make a hire from somebody that doesn't come from that same background. And the language and the structure and the processes that we're used to are totally different than people that come from different communities. How do we take the risk to engage with people from different backgrounds, and how do we arbitrate that so that it's beneficial to employers and it supports the employee in a better format?
And your area specifically is?
Commercial real estate. But that, I'm just going to say, we don't have a diverse workforce anywhere in Southwest Florida. And so it needs to.
He's just using himself as an example.
Yeah, gotcha. I think first and foremost, I think kudos to you for looking around and saying, hey, this isn't a diverse workforce. And I think one of the things that you or anyone else could really do is really surveying your landscape, of course, as you've done and said, hey, guys, this isn't a diverse workforce. And then really try to work early on, probably with firms who have experience in bringing in, diverse candidates, or firms who have a specific vision or mission that says, hey, we focus on in bringing diverse candidates to, Southwest Florida or whatever geographical space that it is. But I think in order to start that, I think one of the things, kind of going back to what I say, the interviewing process, as you're interviewing and you're sitting around the table, within yourself and those who are on those committees, saying to yourself, hey, do we have diverse candidates in this pool? And if we don't, really sitting around the table, having an honest conversation and saying, why don't we? And oftentimes, I don't think this is my personal opinion, I don't think it's any ill intention or any intention to say, hey, we're not going to hire diverse candidates. Once you've been doing something for a while, you just kind of get in the spill of doing those things. So I think first and foremost, looking to say to yourself, okay, why don't we have diverse candidates? And if we don't, how can we create diverse candidates? And many times that may be before you're even thinking about going and hiring someone. Many times that may be going and speaking to a group that's diverse, reaching out to other community partners and collaboration type efforts who do focus and really have a keen focus on diverse candidates. And so I know that isn't a clear-cut answer, but I think the first thing that you can do is, as you're doing, is really evaluating, why don't we have these diverse candidates? And then thinking to yourself and even putting things within your operations or your strategy to say, we want to focus on bringing in diverse candidates. And so those are things that you can do, and really utilizing data to be a huge part of that as well, to drive a lot of those metrics to say, okay, within the next 3 years, we want to increase our diverse candidates, by 3%, whatever that may mean. Now, does that mean that you're only going to hire diverse candidates? No, you're still going to hire the best candidate for the job, but ensuring that that is always a part of the hiring process. And what research shows is that when you do that, you truly get the best candidate.
How do we capitalize it, or what is the structure to expand the access to that community of diverse prospects?
I think one of the big things is, trust. How do you tap into those communities in such a way to where, those individuals won't feel as though they're being hired with some ill intent, but really showing the value of your system, your role, your structure, your organization within those communities. And I think as you start to do a lot of those things, whether it's tapping into those communities that are around you, whether you partner with individuals and firms who focus on diverse suppliers, those types of things, I think that will lead you to being successful and allow you to tap into that. Will that be an overnight thing that just happens? Absolutely not. But the more you focus on that, the more that will grow authentically.
Sorry, just to keep following up on this. So we identify a great prospect, we make a hire. How do we avoid them being perceived or them receiving it as an ill intent, that we're trying to diversify? The reality is you're the first.
Right.
We have to have a first before we have a second. How do we get to a third? And how do we approach that?
Absolutely. The best thing that you can do, have authentic conversations with that person.
Right.
Are you okay? What do you have, what you need? And I'm not talking about the grandiose type things. Connect them with another diverse candidate or another diverse person so that they are feeling comfortable and they have the things that they need.
Awesome. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Are you
last-
gonna ask another question?
Yes, I
Dan?
have another question. Well, we're talking about resiliently.
Uh-huh.
So from an infrastructure and engagement around this, what does the systems need in order to get to what the community needs so that we can move this forward holistically?
That's a great question.
So I want you to, that is a great question. No, I'm gonna ask that question in a different way. Because what I heard us talking about today, and it might not be exactly the same, so you can correct me, I'll allow that. But it is, what I hear is we need to change the way we the way we post our job requirements. We need to think differently about how we recruit people. We need to think differently about the workforce environment that we have in interviewing and thinking about how we retain that workforce. We need to understand how we can know if a person has the competencies that are actually needed for the job. What I'm hearing is we need a set of resources that we could easily deploy to businesses to make it more accessible for them to be able to do some of these things. Has anyone seen, it might be a combination of things, but has anyone seen an example, or do you have any thoughts on what we would need to be able to maybe resource our economic development offices and our chambers with things that could help businesses understand how to start to implement some of these things? Or do we need to invent it?
So did you reference something at the beginning as far as some backbone and training and support services for kids? Maybe that's something that can be expanded on?
Oh, that's okay. That's all right. Yeah. I was just going to say, for Southwest Florida, being here for 18 years, the first thing we have to change are the mindsets within the organizations to be able to identify the stakeholders that we are reaching. For example, with the city of Fort Myers, we've had to go through an audit pretty much with the Human Resource Department to identify which areas of diversity that we really need in departments, because departments were structured with people that look alike, that think alike. But until the mindsets change of the presidents of the companies, the CEOs, the presidents of the universities, and the folks working under them to identify that there is diversity needed in every department, if you will, and then reach out to those resources, recruiters and things like that, to get educated on how to reach these diversified people.
Thank you. That is a great point. And this speaks to sort of the, like, take a look at your organization and the policies and the things that you were talking about. What I want to move, I agree with you completely. But what I know for a fact is that most of the businesses that I work with, at least when we're talking about workforce, they need help to be able, their workforce need is a desperate need right now. And they need help to fill those jobs. So for me, my thought is, how do we make it as easy as possible for our businesses to start to shift and tap into that untapped workforce? Because I'm guessing it's a diverse, untapped workforce, just a guess. John, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that from a data standpoint, but we look at data all the time on who is in the workforce, who has the education and skills. Do you want to comment on that?
What I would say, it probably would start from the bottom up. Targeting those diverse workforces from the beginning, trying to get into the education system. And that's kind of what we're doing with the EDA grant,
Yeah.
right? Getting them into the education system and training them to get the skills we need for the region. And then having that communication between the education systems and the employers saying,
Mhm.
hey, we have these candidates available.
Yep. So we have this ability right now that we are capitalizing on to create that workforce pipeline where we are tapping into folks that don't have credentials, walking alongside them to get their training, remove barriers, and then hopefully connect them to a job. But what are some of the things that we could put in place potentially if there is an opportunity, if funding were to come down? What is something that we could put in place to help employers recognize that this is something that they need and that they're ready for, in terms of changing the way that they think about hiring and creating an environment that retains workers?
So I'm kind of thinking out loud here.
Yeah, this question was not on the pre-questions.
So I think first you have to bring together stakeholders who have that connection to the different audiences that you're talking about. So, that's gonna, you're gonna hear United Way or the NAACP or, Goodwill. They have already some type of training programs, groups that are, formed. Their mission is to target the audiences that we're talking about needs to be more engaged in the workforce. So it requires some type of, nonprofit or someone who can provide some structure to it. But when you convene those stakeholders and you talk about what can you provide as a resource, what is the different community or existing service or funding that, you can bring to help meet the goal, that's how you kind of develop that pathway. So for example, I talked about transportation. So if you're bringing in the transit authority and finding out what type of programs they already have in place that can maybe support what it is that you've identified as a barrier. If you bring in Goodwill and they already have some type of transferable skills. I was going to say soft skills, but they already have some programs that are in place that kind of help you with that mission that you're talking about. Don't reinvent the wheel. Look at all of those agencies and organizations that bring some component of it, get together and figure out how you can give some shape to it.
Sure. So understanding what resources are available that we could tap into to remove barriers for workers to start to pursue that training to get into a specific job. Any other thoughts on what we can do on the other side, the hiring side, in terms of resources that we could potentially provide to our employers?
I think that's a great aspect. And so most specific organizations have agencies or folks who really assist with hiring for diverse candidates. And again, when I'm talking diverse candidates is way more than just black and white, as I'm sure everyone really understands that. So I wanted that to be there as well. But for example, within the healthcare system, there is an agency called the Healthcare Anchor Network, where it specifically works with communities and healthcare agencies and works with their communities so that they actually start to assist in employing folks to work for those agencies. And so many of those types of things exist for a variety of different businesses and such. And so I would always say, depending on your sector of where you work, look particularly for those evidence-based type of initiatives that are already out there that really focuses on, hey, we assist in making sure that, number one, your entity has the ability to attract diverse candidates, but also it reflects the community as well. So I would say, look for those agencies who specialize in those types of things. And also look at your partners, ask others who are in that space to say, hey, how do you solve for this? I mean, we all do that in our own, retrospective areas anyway. Ask them, how do you solve for that? And so I would say use agencies such as that. And this thing won't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It will take time, but I think using data to see where do you start and then having that as a strategic priority moving forward.
Yep. Dr. Whitehouse.
Tessa, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one of the most practical applications we heard today was what Dr. Minaya talked about in terms of those platforms that are there that really help take, once you've identified what the skills are, when you look past what's the traditional way of identifying job qualifications, when you drill down into what those skills are, and there is some technology to help you identify and test for a practical way of demonstrating that skill, that's key as a resource to all types of businesses. I don't think that everyone is aware of that. And so if we were looking at something specifically that funding could do, we could, look at that. We could, look at that particular technology and, maybe identify some either the university or some other organization that could have that, work with our employers, and that be another tool
Yeah.
that they're using.
Is your comment on this topic? Okay, go ahead.
To your question as well, how do we help senior leaders, entrepreneurs better understand other ways that they can recruit, right? And even for large companies that are in extremely diverse communities, it's unless they've been made aware of how to handle a particular situation, they don't know how to take the next step, right? So we and many opportunities are out there like this. There's one program called the Inclusive Leader. And basically it shares for a manager, for a leader, here's some of the things that you may face or that you might not be seeing. But if you know how to solve for them, you can take that next step. So there's programs that, right, how do we get more recruits in? But how do we help managers and leaders better understand the landscape to know how to act, right?
Great point. Dr. Whitehouse?
I would just add, I think one thing that educational institutions can do to help people on the hiring side and create better hiring pipelines at the university level would be actually to universalize internship requirements. So like at FGCU, we have, I think in the neighborhood of about 60 undergraduate degrees, but only around no more than half of them require internships. So there's a huge number of students who are not getting that experience. And that's a huge hiring issue because again, very, very frequently, that is how people get jobs who have college degrees. They get a direct offer from their internship host, or they get a connection from their internship host that leads to an offer somewhere else. So I think making that work across every program and every student at an institution like FGCU would be tremendously helpful for hiring pipelines, but also to create different kinds of internships. Because I think, right now it's one thing for a big corporate company to have an internship program if they can essentially dedicate an entire program to it. A whole department, but I've talked with people from chambers of commerce who say, like a lot of the people we serve, a lot of businesses we serve are maybe 5 employees, 10 employees, 20 employees. A lot of them don't necessarily know what to do with a student for an entire semester.
Right.
Creating some more job shadowing types of things that would also help the student imagine themselves into different kinds of jobs. We don't currently have a lot of that type of internship, but we could create.
So 2 things on, maybe 3 things on that. Number 1, if you have an internship, you're creating your workforce pipeline, right? You're taking a role in that. And we're more likely to keep folks here instead of them leaving to go somewhere else because they know already that they have a job, right? Number 2, internships are a lot of work for businesses, for employers, right? It's not just like come have someone do the work that you don't want to hire someone to do. It's like, that's not what an intern does. So is there an opportunity to expand internships by creating some sort of program where we come together around I know every institution has their own bank of internships and it just makes it really confusing to know what's out there. A lot of times it's who you know. Has anyone seen any successful effort in supporting businesses in sort of like a plug and play, here's how you manage an internship? And then also finding a way to make those internships universally available to people here in Southwest Florida so folks know what their opportunities are. Any thoughts on that? I mean, I could see like EDOs and chambers housing something like that if we could find a way to do that.
I think it's a great idea. I certainly am not aware of anything that's like that, but I feel that once there is something that you can work for as a model and explore how you can make it more universal, it would be invaluable to employers. And so something to discuss and explore.
Okay.
For sure.
Dr. Whitehouse.
Yeah, I guess I would say, I think, an organization like a chamber would be a natural home for internships going to smaller and medium-sized businesses. I think a public entity would be a good source for internships relating to public sector entities or to nonprofits. I think it's expanding the repertoire of organizations that have internship opportunities. I think that's the challenge, and that's where the support's needed. We don't.
Yeah.
Enterprise is always going to have internships available to students. We don't have to worry about them. Big corporations are going to organize this. It's in their interest to do so. But I think it's the smaller businesses, the public entities, the nonprofits that probably need a little more help. And I think organizations like chambers or community foundations can be a big help with them.
Yep. Okay. So we have time probably for one more question. So I want to ask you, I really do feel like we need to, like, I feel like we have a lot of good things in place regionally when it comes to training and figuring out how to get folks into training programs and different opportunities for training that are non-traditional in the way we typically think of, in the way we typically think about how we get people ready to work. I am curious, I'm going to ask sort of a two-pronged question. You can answer either one. All right. So number one, is there anything else that you think we need to be thinking of that could be implemented on a broad scale to support businesses and being more ready to hire folks, maybe that they haven't hired in the past, or folks that don't come with traditional qualifications? So that's number one. Or you can answer the question, is there anything that you think we must address? We know housing is one of the issues, but in order to help the folks that are within that untapped workforce be able to enter into some of these training programs and get into jobs. So that could be anything. So you can answer one or the other, or you can answer both, but those are the two questions. Anything else we need to do to support employers on a broad scale to be able to tap into this untapped workforce? Anything else we need to be thinking about to remove barriers for the untapped workforce to be able to get into training? And we'll just start here and go down the line. Dr. Anderson.
Yeah, really quickly, and this is something I touched on a little bit before, but I'm a huge believer in community collaborations. And so I encourage businesses and organizations to tap into the communities in which they serve and the communities that are around them as well. And as you mentioned here, what are the communities that you don't serve? And so I think as we really focus on a lot of those types of things, that trust factor is huge. We see it all the time in healthcare where people, don't necessarily trust the healthcare system for whatever reason. But you have to be able to have those community collaborations to not only be innovative, but I think also to have that sustainability. The economy is probably going to continue to be tough. And so how do we collaborate with other businesses and organizations to be able to have a lot of that sustainability? So I think community collaboration is really key.
Okay, so finding ways to support employers and getting involved in the communities that they serve or that they're not
Right.
serving. Okay, Sharon?
So I think that there's just a need for some tough discussions with employers and really, taking a deeper look at why some of the hiring practices are the way they are, how much of it involves, biases, and not necessarily with the intent of being biased, but that they are. So if a lot of your new hires come in by word of mouth, or, if you already have a workforce that looks like a certain group of people, and you're making it known that, hey, if you have someone who that would be a good, position for a job, let me know. Well, you're keeping your circle pretty small in terms of opening it up to a different workforce. So I think that you have to kind of look at what your hiring practices are now. And that just means having conversations, just really sitting and talking through it. And I think there needs to be someone, with that skill set to facilitate those conversations and help, employers look a little bit deeper into how they can expand on their hiring.
Okay. Dr. Whitehouse?
So today is my son's last day in his first job as a Lee County school teacher. So he's 22 years old. And I think if I think about the decision tree that's going through his head about whether to continue in that profession, it's basically, can I get a home and can I have a family? Right. And so I think the housing thing is obviously huge in this area, but I think also quality, affordable childcare is also really, really important. And I think if you can't address those two things, you're going to wind up, if you can't have a community that only works for people who make six figures, right? I mean, I think people will tolerate that in New York or San Francisco where there's a lot of opportunity. But I think if you're a smaller city, you have to be able to look at those two things.
Yep. So the talent pipeline is actually a circle, right? We depend on early childhood education to start to instill some of those very initial skills that are needed across jobs. And we depend on early childhood education to be able to allow our current workforce to be able to go to work. So critically important. John?
I would say that communication is key. When it comes to especially engaging with small businesses. Majority of businesses are going to be small businesses. Having that communication with the EDOs, the chambers, EDOs and chambers, they're great resources for the community. They should be utilized more by these small businesses if they aren't already. Because these resources, they're going to know where the untapped markets are in the area, how to reach communities that they might not be reaching otherwise. And also communication with education partners. The demographics of Lee County are much different than the demographics of FGC, for example. It's a much more diverse population, I believe, on FGC campus. And so if you want to achieve that, you should have that communication between education partners and those small businesses.
So finding ways to make it easier for business and education to work together sounds like something that we need to continue to focus on. Okay. Anything else from the branches, from the branch members or online, Harrison? Any other questions? Stephanie?
When we talk about the unemployment rate for Lee County, are there tools or analytics available to dig a little deeper? As we understand locally, there are certain zip codes that the unemployment rate is nearly double.
John knows I love this question.
It gets really difficult with some data points, especially when you start going to a granular level, like a zip code level or anything below county level, you start getting more noise in the data. So it's difficult to really get a clear picture in that sense.
So how could we get a clear picture of where we should be targeting? If we can't do it from, pulling that data, is there another way? Anybody? I won't make you answer that, John. Anybody have any idea of how we could, like, if we were going to try to figure out, like, so where do we start? Where is that untapped workforce? Thoughts? Are you guys happy? I don't think I've asked any of the questions on the paper. No one said this was going to be easy. All right. Any ideas? Anyone? Yeah.
To the information we're willing to provide.
Mhm.
So there's a twofold challenge there. Yes, the unemployment is at a ridiculous high rate, but at the same time, how do you get people interested enough to come out to help themselves?
Mm-hmm. So we don't have time for this, but there's two questions that come to my mind on that. One is, what role does the benefits cliff play in that? And that's a very big problem. And we have found that with our navigators just like one after the other. I can't make one more dollar because if I do, I'll lose my housing, and they can't make enough money to make it work for them to have housing. So the benefits cliff is one issue. And then I think the second one is, I think, we need employers to engage in that part, because if it's for who is like super excited about the idea of going back to school today? Anybody want to get a degree? You excited? Well, so we got one. All right. But if I say, if I can get you you want a better job? Would you like to make more money? That is the enticement to people, adults especially, who are currently, struggling to make ends meet. Going back to school sounds like one more thing,
But I think,
right?
Tessa, for me, one of the issues is I look at this in housing, transitional housing issues, right? So somebody needs a first stage. And so we've got this first 6 months is 100% paid for. The next 90 days are 50% paid for. The next 90 days are 25% paid for. For me, it's a function of, hey, our community in middle to low income areas have okay jobs, just not sustainable jobs. And to get to the sustainable job level, they need that education and that experience. And so we need some supportive mechanism to bridge the gap, because most small businesses, no offense to Lee Health, aren't Lee Health.
Right.
Like, it's not even the school district that has billion-dollar budgets that can't afford to pay. I've got 4 people in my company. If I make a wrong decision, I can't afford to have a wrong decision. So I'm only going to my network because it's like if you only can afford a certain amount of food, I only buy that food. So my ask is in the supportive side of this is if there's any bridge in the agency to have the education paired with supportive gap funding
Yeah.
to de-risk it, right? It's like any of these things, we just need to de-risk it.
Yep.
So my truck driver who's making 60 grand can take 40 grand from me to get to 80 grand. Right? Like that's the process that I need. And it's an 18 to 36 month process for me to get them to that next level.
Thoughts? I like that.
I would say that when it comes to keeping the workforce here and making sure that they have not just jobs, but sustainable jobs, the jobs that are going to be well paid, that comes back to the topic of diversifying the economy. It's one thing to train them, but you also want to make sure those jobs are available here. And so unfortunately, a lot of the jobs that are, shouldn't say jobs, but a lot of the industries that we specialize in, hospitality and retail and so forth, that those are comparative advantage, but they're also not very well paying industries compared to others.
Yeah, so you have to do economic development and workforce development in tandem. If you do only one, then you lose the other, right? So that is key. And so we have to always keep that in mind. Workforce development is economic development. And so thinking about some of these sectors that are growing, like manufacturing and logistics, thinking about how we work on this teacher pipeline. I mean, there are no jobs without teachers. So this is a problem. We've got to figure out how to solve that. And so how do we tap into that untapped workforce to start to fill some of these jobs and change lives, right? Change and, maybe change some generational issues. You got something, Harrison?
So we have branch member Jen Hagan. How can we help Southwest Florida employers understand and address the fiscal cliff for their employees? Instead of paying extra per hour, adding childcare services, etc., trying to address the ALICE households in Southwest Florida. Let's see, also follow-up comments. Instead of more money per hour, more services available as far as healthcare, insurance, childcare, transportation options, remote work availability.
So overcoming the benefits cliff by tapping into other resources that folks have to spend their money on is her question.
The answer is densified residential.
Mixed use? Okay. Mixed use is a theme in all of the mixed use, ability to access work with multiple modes of transportation. Anything else, Dan? That's good. Okay. All right. I like this idea that she has, this idea of how can we think creatively about overcoming the benefits cliff? I will say that our navigators that work with adults to get them into training and into jobs and work with employers. So if you know employers, they can connect with us. They have done the training with the Atlanta Fed to be able to review what the benefits cliff looks like with individuals so that they actually understand what it means and then think of ways to overcome it together. So we need more of that, I would say, as well. So that's another idea that we should be thinking. How do we have folks walking alongside individuals to help them? I mean, these things are overwhelming and scary, right? We need to be thinking about how we can use the resources that are available.
I have a request for Chamber and Lee Health and the schools that we have. We make a big point out of saying, hey, we might not be your forever job. If we can help place you to your next right job, that'd be awesome. And so from my mindset of like the number of people that come through Lee Health, that then they're maybe they're brilliant, but they're not actually really good with patients. Well, then they can come into commercial real estate where you can be a jerk. Right? I mean, somehow creating mutual access for right placement and right positioning would be helpful if we could increase our access to that workforce.
So this idea of transferable skills, right? Like if these skills are required for this job, these skills are required for this job, one's in healthcare, one's in real estate, but we could like if the person wants to switch, they potentially could. Do we understand what skills are transferable? What skills are transferable from hospitality? We've got a lot of hospitality workers that are out of work right now because they're, the islands have been out. So great great discussion. If you have any ideas for initiatives based on the conversation today for the, oh, yes, Troy, go ahead.
Sorry, one last question. We had the opportunity to get a glimpse of the impact of the new immigration bill here in the state of Florida last week. While our organization follows the E-Verify and follows all those guidelines, a lot of our contractors may not at the current time. And so we had construction sites that were completely empty, restaurants closed down, landscapers not available. I've been kind of debating to even ask this question or not, but is there a path forward for us? Because if we see the impacts of just last week and it actually goes to fruition on July 1st, what can be done to, my wife's Hispanic, we go through a lot of this. We have a lot of family ties in the local area, and there's just a lot of nervousness out there of what's next. And a lot of these organizations are also very nervous, businesses, of how they can, what is the path forward for them as well. So just thought it was kind of the appropriate time to ask that question.
It's a great question. I'm glad that you asked.
But what could be done here locally?
So it's so interesting. We just had a call yesterday because this affects us as well as a healthcare system and individuals coming to, our emergency rooms and us having to pose those types of questions. And of course, as a, public and governmental agency, we have to kind of abide by those things. And we had concerns, would folks, come into the ER knowing that, or leave as we're asking questions. And so one of the things that we're doing, of course, is we are following those guidelines and really trying to, and this is just for us, really trying to script our clinicians and workforce in such a way to where those patients know that, hey, the care that we provide you won't necessarily be impacted by the bill. Now, are those patients going to believe that? Are they not? That's still to be kind of unfolded. But that's one of the things that we took it upon ourselves to really focus on, the kind of what we can control, because of course we can't mandate or change anything from a political aspect. So we really focus on, the infrastructure, the system within Lee Health, of the message that we are going to send out to those individuals. And so that was our focus. But we do have concerns with whether it's vendors or contractors or how that impacts us, because there is a lot of nervousness. There's a lot of anxiety around it. And I think a lot of things are still to be determined.
It was a hard question, Troy. No, it's okay. I mean, this is something we're going to have to figure out together, right? So I'm really glad that you brought it up. All right. So I am looking at Harrison. You have one other question? All right. We're going to make this one quick, or you're going to make me go over, and I don't like to go over.
Also from Jen Hagan.
Jen Hagan.
How can we connect Southwest Florida employees with the LCSD students or community partner schools to increase awareness for students of local job options and awareness of students of potential for career development and mentorship opportunities?
Any thoughts on that? So helping folks understand, students understand what jobs are available here in Southwest Florida before they graduate from high school. Thoughts?
Well, my initial thoughts is increased engagement between the school counselors that are in these schools, letting them have more opportunities to understand and know, as any profession, you have, continuing education and things that are helping you get better at your job. So one of those components could be making sure that they are more aware of what types of resources there are, understanding that. And so that's what then they can then share with their students.
Yep. And I think the other idea is to support this, to take on this idea of career pathway exposure as a community and not expect the schools to be able to do all that because of how overtapped they are. And so that's one thing that Future Makers is trying to work on, is like bringing employers into the schools on behalf of the school districts. I think we have to own this education and workforce problem, all of us, because it's all of our problem. And so if you have ideas about this topic or about other things that we've discussed this morning, please feel free to, or don't feel free, please do scan that QR code, submit your initiative ideas online. You know, the whole point here is that we want to be ready if funding becomes available to us to be able to say, these are our priorities around education and workforce development. Education and workforce development is impacted by all the other branches as well. But thinking about things we've seen or things that we would want to prioritize developing to answer some of the problems that we've come up with today and that we're experiencing on a daily basis. Okay, so go ahead and does everybody have the QR code? Oh, well, okay. Any other question or discussion from the branch? If not, I'm going to close to public comment. Okay. Go ahead. Here, wait. I got it. Well, I'll stand here with it.
Thank you. Hey, my name is Marco Villalobos. Moved here a year ago today from Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a professional filmmaker, but also joined a church here as a pastor. And the question's been thrown around, is there a model businesses can use that is more advanced than an internship that will lead to higher paying jobs that are sustainable? And so for a couple of years, I was a high school teacher, a filmmaker in Nashville, Tennessee, and they were doing this national model called CTE, Career Technical Education, where basically would hire professionals to teach the students who didn't have a degree. And so what that looked like, it was 2 years of going, getting trained to be a teacher, to actually teach the students, but I brought my professional expertise. And I'm bringing that up here because I have a family member who's here in the school system, who is in that situation right now, where someone who maybe had graduated high school would get paid $20,000 more than they would because they don't have a degree, but there's nothing in place for them to go down this path where they've been experienced for 2 decades and doing the work, and would probably be a better teacher than someone who's 22 years old and has all the knowledge of just whatever degree they have. And so it's specifically being a choir teacher. And so I wish I was going to be here this afternoon, because I know we're talking about arts and agriculture, but I'm filming this afternoon. But I think just to tie that in, just talking about the education system, being able to create or maybe even contact the Nashville, Tennessee, and whoever, the superintendents there, of how this national model has worked, because it worked well when I worked there, but maybe implementing that here in our school systems here as well, and wondering if there's something bigger than that, because it wasn't an internship. I was teaching as I was learning how to be a teacher, and then there was still minimal college classes that I had to take to be that. So I wonder if there's something similar that would help, that's more advanced than an internship, but not exactly a 4-year college degree, that would advance and create more jobs, more training, and higher paid jobs. So.
Well, that is a really great idea. And we're actually doing a little bit of that now, but we can contact Nashville because we've taken other good programs from Nashville. Any other public comment? I should have stayed back there.
Hi, I'm Betsy, and I'm the coordinator of the Immigration Network, and thank you for your question. I think July 1st is going to be pretty scary for a lot of us, just trying to, understand what's going on. But I did want to reinforce the Alice report. Has excellent data there. And part of what I think it says is that we need a living wage. When we talk about benefits, employers giving benefits are helpful, but when you change jobs and the next employer doesn't have those benefits, you're in trouble. So I think we really need to look at what is reasonable to be considered a living wage. Also, I have used CareerSource and I've used AARP in the past to have paid internship positions for nonprofits. So it's the person, we're getting a skill, we're being paid to train that person. They receive money through different grants, but it's been an excellent program. And most of the time it's for nonprofits that have a really hard time staffing. But I would say that through those programs, probably 85 to 90% of the people that have been participated in that have ended up being hired by those. We figure out we need them. We realize the skills that they're bringing to us. And we figure out how to fund it. And usually they're about a year to 3 years as the funding that you get.
Thank you. Any other public comment before I walk away? Oh,
Yeah, Angelo Biasi. I'm an education and workforce technologies solutions provider. There are actually some programs. We did a lot of our focus group testing at Dunbar. And as many of you may know, it was the first Microsoft certified school in the world. And, we witnessed kids getting, upwards of 20 to 30 certifications in Microsoft solutions and products. So it can happen at the high school level. There's also schools in Nebraska that are including certified nursing assistant, CNA certifications right in high school. So the moment that they graduate, they have jobs waiting for them. But it is possible. It is happening in our community. And I think there's opportunities to expand that even further.
all right. So that's it for public comment. Next slide. And so that is it. We're going to adjourn. I want to thank our amazing panel. They did not get easy questions. So everybody give them a big thank you. All right.